Hello, and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books, so I can recommend the best to you. And today I have 30 book recommendations for you because it is finally the August wrap-up episode, obviously happening midway through September. You know, shit happens. Your girl has been busy. And I just always start recording and all the thoughts try to come out at once. First of all, the main big thing is that if you're watching this on video, I am back in my apartment, aka the PBG studio. I literally have not been in my apartment. I've been coming back a little bit now that September started, but I was not here from like the end of July through at least like the first week of September. So I'm back a little bit in September, just going back and forth. I am currently only here for a few days, and then I'm going back to Long Island to try to get the last few beach days in. But yeah, that's why you haven't seen this background in a few months. I am back in the PBG studio, and it does feel good. The other thing I was trying to get out, it is Wednesday. It's not Monday. And for some of you, you might not even realize that this episode is up a few days late. I just want to say I appreciate everyone being very understanding, aka no one sent me a mean message about this getting out late. I just didn't have time to record, and I don't like to record bulk episodes in advance. This is usually a recording hours before I'm about to upload a podcast. So the downside of doing a show on your own is that when you can't record, there is no show. And I had 2 weekends back to back of weddings. I was traveling. I was exhausted. I just didn't have time. So there almost wasn't going to be an episode this week. And then I realized I would have time on Tuesday, which is when I'm recording. So I appreciate that you guys let me kind of just like upload this when I was able to. And I will just on that note say, the next like month of PBG, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to be doing. So for the rest of September, there will be normal Monday episodes. Things are already planned and in the works. But in October, I am going to be on my parish trip for a few weeks. So I don't know yet if I'm going to attempt to bulk record or just take a few weeks off. I don't know, but I just want to like give you guys a heads up that things might be looking a little different in October. But then once I'm back from my trip, November and December and on in the future, we'll be back to normal programming. So anyway, it's the August wrap up, better late than never, because I have 30 books to talk to you guys about. I had a really good August. It was interesting. I said this when I talked about July, but July was literally one of the busiest months of my life. My brother got married. Then I was on one of my best friend's bachelor trips, and then I had my 30th, and like in between there were so many events, and it was really great. But like I'm such an introvert, and I love being around people and for events like that, but I really like need alone and I need downtime to recharge. And I just did not have that in July, and I kept saying that I was excited for August to just like chill and do nothing. And that's something that I really love about the summer. I love just laying by the pool, reading, going to the beach and reading. Like when I'm at the beach, I'm literally just reading. And I really think that those moments in the summer help to recharge me for the end of the year, which we all know gets really hectic. So August was so chill. How many times did I just say chill? I really had like nothing big or major happen. I was on Long Island the whole summer. I did start applying to jobs in August, so that was like a lot. I am working freelance, so I've been busy doing that as well. But I feel like I'm also saying so much just because I just haven't recorded like this in a bit. But it was really nice to just relax in August. And then September, boom, right away, we kicked it off with some bigger social events. So September is like a nice balance of being social and being chill, which is like ideally how I like to operate. Aside though from just having a chill August, I read 30 books. So we're going to talk about it. And honestly, I'm about to say something that I was like, I'm not going to say anything publicly, but you guys are my people. So the reason why I even would want to say something is like the people who follow me, and like if you're listening to this, like I know you understand where I'm coming from. I've been getting, and I didn't want to talk about it because I was like, people that are going to listen to it are going to be like, are not literally the people that I'm talking about, but I've been getting like an influx of mean messages of people being like, there's no way you read all those books, or like talking shit about how much I read. And then the other day, this random woman commented, like, imagine talking shit about how much somebody reads. And honestly, it picked up so much in the summer. And I think it's because as K Red What Grows, like a lot of strangers are seeing my posts, people who don't follow me and understand who I am. And it weirdly is making me back to the days when I was really self-conscious about how much I read. I used to be very self-conscious about the fact that I read fast because people would just comment all the time. And it made me feel back to that like thing when you're a kid and you're like, oh, this is other. But I kind of felt like that in August. Like saying I read 30 books is wild. Two of them were audiobooks, but like still I physically read 28 books. And I listened to two more, but that's just how I am and how I operate. And I know you guys listening know that. I just have to keep reminding myself that like I share all of this because you guys are really getting like a deep look in my psyche right now. Because it really pisses me off, to be honest with you. And like if you can go and maybe a few comments will be there that slip through the cracks, but I like to delete them and I block them because my Instagram page is like my safe space where like there's no space for negativity there. But it just really is annoying me lately, this like people judging how much you read. Like even reading one book is a good thing. It's just like it gets me so bothered because it's like nobody talks about, oh, you watched that many hours of TV. Oh, you've watched every show in the Netflix top 10. Like nobody says things about it like that. It's just for some reason reading is this thing. I also always feel this about like when I say I don't drink and people get weird. It's like no one questions if you don't do coke, but like if you don't drink, that's a weird thing. I don't know. I just like got in my head in August about people judging how much I read, but whatever, because it's stupid. I actually see, I already feel better for just saying that, but, yeah, it felt good to get this off my chest. And it's a plus. And I literally, like, I swear to you, I know not one person listening to this is one of the people who left me a message. If you are a troll like that and you snuck through, then like fuck off. This place isn't for you. This is a safe space to gush and talk over books. And I don't know why I'm telling you guys that because you know that, but I have 30 books to talk to you about. So I guess we should get into it. So the first book that I read, and you guys know the drill. I have Goodreads open. I'm going to read you my quick thoughts. This is an interesting experiment to see how much I remember about the books that I read. The first book is The Other Family by Wendy Corsi Staub. This was part of my summer reading challenge that I set for myself. I pulled 30 books off of my shelves that I wanted to read over the summer. I'm almost done. I'm still in summer mode. Like to me, summer doesn't end until September 20, whatever. So I'm allowed to still be doing this summer reading challenge because it's still summer for me. Anyway, this was one of those books and I gave this 4 stars. I flew through it. Every now and then you need like a dumb thriller, and that's exactly what this book was. So this is about a family that moves from LA to Brooklyn only to find out that the house they moved into is a murder house. And suddenly events from the past start merging with events in the current timeline, and you end up finding out a lot about what happened in the house, about the family who moves into the house. There's a lot of different perspectives at play here. Some really good fun twists. I think if you're looking for just like a quick thriller that's not too serious, it's a very easy read, then I would definitely recommend this one. And because it's a thriller, I can't really say much more about it. The next book that I read is Summer Darlings by Brooke Lee Foster. I gave this 3 stars. So I really loved, my favorite from her is On Gin Lane. She writes these really great historical fiction novels set, well, her latest one was in the 70s and I did interview her about that book, but Gin Lane was the 50s and this one is like the 60s. It's like Kennedy era. And this is her debut and it is about this girl who is nannying for the summer on Martha's Vineyard for this very wealthy family. And it's really just a peek into how the other half lives. I really like reading about the locals versus like wealthy people summering on the place. I like that dynamic. It has to do with me living on Long Island and like going to the beach in the Hamptons where there's like millionaires next to me, but I just live 20 minutes down the road. So it really plays into that. It's the 60s. It's Kennedy's. There's just like so much going on here. Honestly, there's nothing in here that was so super, super memorable. It was a fine read, just not one of my favorites. And like I said, I gave that 3 stars. The next book that I read is The Grandest Game. Do I say is or was? I feel like I go back every single time. We're just going to keep going back and forth. So the next book was The Grandest Game by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is the first in a spin-off series of her books, The Inheritance Games, which I love those books. I'm such a huge fan of them. I don't think you necessarily need to read this book to need to read the Inheritance Game series. It's like a 3.5 book series in order to appreciate this, but I would, because just like by nature of it being, it's like the main characters from the Inheritance Games aren't the main characters, but they're in there and you learn about their dynamics. I really liked this. So it's kind of hard. I guess you have to read the books. It's hard to talk about it without spoiling, but it's like almost like reading like a game show. My only issue is that I wish we learned more about um like it felt like it ended very abruptly within the game, and all of the characters playing the games had very interesting plot lines, and I wish we could have like seen them go a little bit further within this book. Obviously there's going to be another one, but I just wanted like a little bit more in this one. The next book I read was The Light Over Oslo by Alex Rikloff. This was a really interesting World War II historical fiction. I gave this 3 stars. It's about a real woman named Daisy Harriman, and she was the U.S. ambassador to Norway when World War II broke out, and the Germans invaded Norway, and you follow her plight as she's like getting out, but at the same time, like really the main character is her niece, who she was in Poland, I believe, and her boyfriend and like love of her life has gotten missing. So she's on a trek to find him. She goes to her aunt for help. At the same time, they're like, you have to get out of here. Like the Nazis are on their way. You're going to be in danger. There's a really interesting side plot about Daisy, who's the real woman, getting the Norwegian royals out of Norway, which is a real story that just in my like studies of different European royals I've heard before, and I liked reading about that. I liked reading about a different aspect of World War II, but other than that, this wasn't one of my favorites. The next book that I read, I'm out of breath already. The next book that I read is The Girls Are Also Nice Here by Lori Elizabeth Flynn. This was another one of my series. This was fine. I thought it was more suspense than thriller. The main girl is invited to her 10-year college reunion, and she keeps ignoring the invites until she starts to get threats that she should go, be like hinting to something that happened in her past. So she goes with her husband, who knows absolutely nothing about her past. And quickly, like a lot of things come to a head, and you start to get flashbacks of what actually happened. There's a murder involved. It's a super quick read. It wasn't really my favorite. And this is what I meant to say in the beginning too. I had so much word vomit in the beginning of this episode. I read so many books in August. There are 3 5-star reads in here, but I felt like I had so many books that I didn't super love. And I think part of that is that August was really a month where I was like, these are books I've been meaning to read. I need to get through them. And I always find when I do these challenges, when I do the like 24 books to read in 2024 challenge, this is my 3rd year doing it. It's my 3rd year doing it. And every time I end up like only really loving a few. And I'm finding the same thing with this 30 books to read the summer challenge. I always find that when I've had books on my shelf for a really long time, maybe there's a reason that they were there. There was a reason why I wasn't super inclined to pick them up. Like they just didn't super work for me. So that's what I was really finding happen this month. Anyway, the next book I read is The Royal Nanny by Karen Harper. Karen Harper has a few different historical fiction novels about like different people within the royal world. This one was really interesting. It's about Charlotte Bill, who is the nanny of King George, meaning Queen Elizabeth's dad, and his siblings. And I really liked this because they had him, like his brother is Edward, also David, who is the one who married Wallace Simpson and abdicated, but then they also had another brother who was disabled, and the family kind of like hid him away. But I really liked getting inside this version, this era of the royal family at this age. I thought it was like a really just like interesting look into the history, seeing a different side of King George II, Mary of Teck, learning about Prince John, who is the one that was disabled. I liked Charlotte. I liked reading her story. I really like when Karen Harper does this, and I think Wendy Holden also does this, like bringing to light lesser known royal stories. I really love that. Next book I read is The Making of Her by Bernadette Jiwa. This is actually one of my 24 and 24 books. I've had this on my shelf for a while. The Irish Catholic in me was very excited to pick this one up. So this is a brutal story of a woman who is forced to give up her baby in the 1960s in Ireland, and then her reunion with that child 30 years later. It's like I really don't want to give much more away because it's like I don't want to spoil anything, but basically she is forced to give up her baby, like I said, in the 60s, and then 30 years later she receives a letter from that child asking for her birth parents' help because her child is sick and she basically needs like um maybe it was a stem cell donor. And you then there's like a bunch of different timelines and you learn the full story of what happened, and it's just like a really brutal and real and heart-wrenching look into this one woman's life, and all the choices, little choices that you make kind of snowball, and how they can ultimately hurt you, and then how you can kind of like change your mind and make it better. I feel like I'm not super selling it. I don't want to give anything away, but I really love that. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was a 5-star read. It is Where Are You, Echo Blue by Haley Kirscher. I loved this book. So I started this on the beach and I could not put it down. This is a like narrative on fame and celebrity and child stars. So basically Echo Blue is like the it girl of the like late 90s. And the book opens up on New Year's Eve going into the year 2000, and she has been off the scene lately because she did a stint in rehab after a bunch of dramatic events happened. And she's supposed to be making her first public appearance since rehab on TRL and ringing in the new millennium on TV, except Echo Blue doesn't show up. So then we go to our other point of view, which is this writer who grew up obsessed with Echo Blue. And she is convinced that she is the only person who can look for Echo because she thinks that she knows her so well. So this is where it gets super interesting because in the writer's chapters, she literally goes on the hunt for Echo Blue. And it's like, as you're reading it, you're like, well, yeah, where is Echo Blue? Like there's always this like giant mystery as a through line in the book, but she thinks that she knows her because she knows the public perception of her, the version that Echo Blue put forward to the public. But then we have chapters from Echo Blue, and they start as a child, and she is the daughter of a famous actor, and her mom was like a very famous child star, and we see her life from her childhood leading up to this disappearance. And it was so interesting, the juxtaposition of them. Like you would have the same event written from both perspectives. Like, for example, the writer would be like, oh, I was always so jealous of like Echo's dad loves her so much. Like when they like how he's like holding her hand when they go out to dinner and all these pictures. But then in Echo's, you get the real story. And you see like they had a very tumultuous relationship. So it ends up like the whole thing is like trying to solve this mystery of where Echo Blue is. But in order to get there, it is such an interesting narrative on not even child stardom, just like celebrity and parasocial relationships. And I feel like the word parasocial, I've only started hearing it in the last few years. I feel like you really do assume that phrase with social media, but this is like in the 90s, like really just showing you how you can think you know someone, it could be anyone, but also a celebrity, and you actually have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. Like I thought it was so interesting. It made me think so much. I really loved it. I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjam Kamali. I loved this. I gave this 4 stars. I really don't want to say much because so many shocking twists and turns happen, but basically at its core, this is historical fiction following 2 Iranian women as they meet as children in the 50s, and then we follow them over decades through all of Iranian history and political tumult through to their adult lives. The story itself is so good as they meet as children. They're from very different worlds, and their friendship is really like this giant bond in their lives. But then the way that you see these 2 different women who are so close navigate the political environment that they're in was just so fascinating to read. I also felt like I learned so much about Iranian politics, the revolution, the history. It was just so good. And I really don't want to say I don't want to say anything really because so many things surprised me. Like watching these events that happen and unfold, like I knew about the revolution, but reading it through the way that these two women from 2 different worlds navigate it and are affected by it was just so fascinating. Like I loved it so much. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read is Scandalous Women by Jill Paul. So this is historical fiction about the famous authors Jackie Collins and Jacqueline Susan. I actually have never read either author, but I still loved this book so, so much. I gave it 4 stars. So basically what happens is you, in one perspective, you have Jackie Collins, who is over in London, and it's basically you're reading like a biographical fiction of her until when it gets to the point where she crosses over and she comes to New York, and it's a fictional friendship between her and Jacqueline Susan. But in the Jacqueline Susan chapters, we have this fictional character, Nancy, who is a college graduate, and it's 1965, and she's working at a publishing house, and she ends up getting to work on one of Jacqueline Susan's books. And she wrote Valley of the Dolls. They're seen as like very risque, like people can't believe that these books are being published, that they're written by a woman. And you see Nancy working in the publishing industry and navigating all that as a young woman, and then meeting someone like Jacqueline who really takes her under her wing. And then the friendship comes in with Jackie Collins, and like so much happens. There's romance in it. It's like fun, like gossipy about publishing too. Like it's just so good. I really enjoyed this, and I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it because I've never read either of these authors. I don't think you need to read. I would say you don't need to be familiar with these authors, because I literally am not, because they're such fascinating, vibrant women, and that comes off of the page. And if anything, it made me want to read their work. The next book I read is All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker, which this was our August book club pick. So I am not going to discuss it since I have a full episode giving all of my thoughts, but that was a 5-star read. Next up is The Reunion by Kayla Olson. This was part of my summer reading challenge. I've had this book on my shelves for so long, and I think it's interesting and it's important to note that I had this book on my shelves before. This is Hollywood romance, and I had it before we got like this influx of really great Hollywood romance books, and this was fine. I gave it 3 stars. It was a cute book, but the Hollywood romance trope has gotten so maybe overdone, but there are so many books that do it so well. So I feel like now if you're doing it, you really, really have to find a way to make it stand out. And I think because this was an early one, I maybe would have liked this more if I read it when it came out. But this is basically a Hollywood romance about a teen show that's being rebooted, and the main actor and actress kind of had like a flirty friendship throughout the course of the show. And then now that they're working together, they're like feelings are being rekindled. I wasn't super sold on the romance aspect of it. Their relationship felt kind of rushed, but it was cute. It was fine. The next book I read is God of the Woods by Liz Moore, and I didn't love this. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was really hard to get through. Part of me thinks it's because I read All the Colors of the Dark like one book apart from this. Maybe I should have spaced them out over months, because they're very similar. Like the plots are completely different. It's just like they're both in the 70s in the woods with murder. But this fell really flat for me, which was disappointing because Long Bright River is one of my favorite books. I have very high hopes, which is also part of the problem. I thought that it's basically a girl goes missing at a summer camp in the 70s, and it's like shocking because like a decade or so before, her brother also went missing from the same camp, and it turns out that they're both the children of this wealthy family who actually owns the camp. So you would think that I would have really liked like wealthy family kind of like historical fiction aspect of it, but I didn't. It felt very unnecessary. There was a lot in this book that just felt like it didn't need to be there. The way that the mystery wrapped up, I did really like that, but you weren't getting twists throughout that like kept me turning the page. I was reading it because I was like, I wanted to know what happened, but I also kind of just wanted to get through it. I don't think it needed to be 476 pages. It could have easily been 100 pages less. You guys know how I feel about thrillers, although I would say this is more suspense than thriller. A lot of it just felt unnecessary and moved too slow, and I got bored. The next book I read, now we're on a roll with books I didn't love though, so buckle up. The next book I read was House of Glass by Sarah Paquin. She used to write thrillers with somebody else, and I don't know what the heck I'm saying. I really loved her last thriller. That was just her. But the ones that she wrote with a writing partner, I went through this phase where I literally had to say to myself, like, why am I making myself read these books when I know I'm probably not going to like them? Because I loved The Wife Between Us. And then the last few after that just did not do it for me. Then she started writing thrillers on her own. I loved the last one. I don't remember what it's called. maybe it's called Gone Tonight. This one I just didn't like. Um, it is about like this nanny of this very wealthy family like falls out the window and dies, and the assumption is that it was a murder. And so the main character is a lawyer, but she works for the children, so it's her job to get to know the family and get to know the child, because after the nanny died, now the parents are getting divorced. So she goes in though and starts noticing that things don't add up and are weird, and it's a thriller, so I'm not going to say much more, but I just honestly thought it was boring, and I thought it was so obvious. And I feel like that's saying something, because I try not to solve the crimes when I'm reading the thrillers because I like to be shocked, but I solved this one. Just not for me. Next book, I feel like I'm so out of breath. Do you guys hear it? Like, I'm just not used to talking about 30 books at once. It's been a month since I've done that. Anyway, the next book I read is Same as It Ever Was by Claire Lombardo. This was another one of my most anticipated books of the year. The most fun we've ever had, is one of my favorite books. I didn't like this. I gave it 2 stars. I thought it was so boring. It's basically 500 pages of a character driven story about one woman as she navigates marriage and motherhood over the course of her life. I am fine with a book being all character and no plot as long as I'm interested in the character's life. And I really wasn't into reading about her just like talk about motherhood. And I don't mean that as a slight to anyone who is interested in that. I think that moms will read this and relate to a lot of what she went through. That is just so far from my life. And then I'm not saying that you also have to relate to every single book, but I think when you're reading a 500-page book with no plot, you've got to be at least interested in it. And I wasn't. And I kept going because I was waiting for something. There were some interesting little like fun reveals as her life went on, but I probably would not have picked this up if I didn't already love this author, which also plays into about like the point I was trying to make earlier that I don't remember now. But this just didn't do it for me. And but of course, though, the writing is very beautiful, as in typical Claire Lombardo fashion. The next book that I read was The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. This was fine. I also read Cultish over the summer, and I also thought it was fine. Cultish, I realized that I actually know a lot about cults. And this one is about different like psychological phenomenons. So the halo effect and things like that. I like the way that Amanda writes, but I just think that I'm learning that I'm not really super interested in like psychological books like this. The next book I read was The Last Night in London by Karen White. This was one of my 24 and 24 books. I gave this 3 stars. Honestly, not too much really to report here. It's a dual timeline historical fiction that follows a family mystery that is kind of set during the Blitz in London. The plot was super interesting, but this was way too fucking long. A lot of it felt so unnecessary. I also had a phase in August where I felt like all I read was 400 or 500-page books, and I was just so freaking over it. Like All Colors of the Dark was like 500 pages, and that felt warranted. But in some books, it just feels like way too much, and it makes the story drag, and it kind of like pulls you out of it, and it makes me like it less than I probably would have. The next book was my August audiobook that I flew through. I listened to it, I think, in like 2 weeks. And it is The Queen by Andrew Morton. This is just a biography on Queen Elizabeth. You know, I never get sick of that shit. I basically knew every single thing in it, but I still enjoyed it. And I gave that 4 stars. The next book I read was The Disappearing Act by Catherine Steadman. This was another of my 24 and 24 books. I thought this was fine. It's a Hollywood thriller, which I did like that. I liked that take on Hollywood stories because, like you guys know, I love a Hollywood story. It's about this girl who she's like pretty famous in England, and she goes to Hollywood. She goes to LA for an audition, and she meets this girl in the room for the audition, and the girl's like, "Oh, can you like watch my car or something weird?" And she like and like hold her bag, and then the girl disappears and like never comes back. So the actress starts getting concerned and looking into it, and it turns into like this giant mystery. I thought that the premise was really good. I didn't love the execution, but I did really like the ending. I gave that 3 stars. The next book I read is The Family Bones by Elmar. I don't mean this as an insult, but I can't tell if it's YA or not. Like, I love a YA thriller. And the writing just felt very young, but like it also wouldn't surprise me if you told me that this was an adult book. So I don't really know. But our main girl is Olivia, and she's from a family that is full of psychopaths going back generations, and she has distanced herself from them for good reason. But she is fascinated with psychopathy, and she's studying it for her PhD. So she's invited to the family reunion, and she decides to go because she wants to observe her family, and also she wants to interview her grandfather for her thesis because he has never agreed to sit down for an interview up until this time. And then slowly on this family reunion, people turned out to be murders. This was fine. I gave this 3 stars. I did really like the ending, but otherwise, like, nothing super special. The next book I read was The Next Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. I gave this 3 stars. When I first heard that, so if you don't know, this is a sequel to the book The Last Mrs. Parrish, which was the book that got me into thrillers, so will always hold a very special place in my heart. There is a big part of me that wonders, though, if I read that for the first time now, would I love it as much as I did back then? Just makes you think, you know? When I heard that there was a sequel coming out, I was like, this feels so unnecessary. Like, it felt like the story was finished. And I still don't think it was super necessary, but I was excited to dive back into this world. I did like this. The first half I really liked. I also liked this more than Liv Constantine's like last few books. The second half is kind of where it fell apart for me. I was reading it because I still wanted to know what happened, but like not super sure a sequel was necessary. The next book I read was Summer Romance by Annabelle Mahagan, and we're just continuing my trend of kind of being let down for books by books that I was super excited for. I gave this 3 stars. I love Nora Goes Off Script. That was a 5-star read for me a few years ago. And then her last book, I forgot the name. I also loved that. This one, though, just didn't really do it for me. It's a best friend's brother romance following a newly divorced woman. I thought that the couple was really cute, but it felt like their relationship was kind of rushed. My favorite part of this book was watching this woman follow her footing post-divorce. That being said, just this week, the author announced her next book, and it sounds exciting. Like, I'm into the synopsis of it, but I've just got to say, she's got to stop setting books on Long Island if she's going to say in Long Island. You don't say, I'm in Long Island. You say, I'm on Long Island. And in all of her books that take place on Long Island, she says in Long Island. And even on the blurb for the next book, it says in Long Island. And that is just not accurate. Ask any local, they'll tell you it is on Long Island, and it just like bothers me so much. And if it happens once in a book, whatever, it's fine, but this has kept happening with her and with her Long Island books, and it is just like driving me insane. So someone let her know that I told her that. The next book I read, oh my God, this is what I meant with like me not loving all of my August books. The next book is And So I Roar by Abby Dari, which was one of my most anticipated books of this year because I absolutely loved The Girl with the Loud Voice. It's on my favorite shelf. It is one of my favorite books. It's just like a beautiful story. I was so excited when I found out that the author had another book coming out. I didn't realize until I was reading this book that it's a sequel. This picks up like 2 days after The Girl with the Loud Voice ended. So I think I would have enjoyed this more if I had read it closer to The Girl with the Loud Voice, or if I realized it was a sequel, I would have given myself a refresher. I was reading this on the beach and I didn't have service, so I couldn't like Google a synopsis of like a Spark Notes of The Girl with the Loud Voice. I just didn't love this one as much. I don't want to say anything because it's a sequel, but it just like, it didn't really do it for me. The next few books I read, though, did do it for me. So finally, by the end of August, things took a turn for the better. So the next book is A Shadow in Moscow by Catherine Ray. I loved this. So this follows 2 spies in Russia, one in the immediate post-World War II years and one in the 80s. And this reads like a spy thriller, but it's obviously historical fiction. It's full of like wild twists, and it is thrilling, and I had anxiety, and it is so, so good. So our post-World War II girl is Ingrid, and right after the war, she is from Vienna, so Austria has been like heavily impacted by World War II and the Nazis, and she agrees to a very quick marriage with this guy who worked for the Soviet embassy, but she finds out when she marries him and gets back to Moscow that he's actually like in the KGB and like working his way up the ranks. And obviously she didn't know what that was at first, but she starts to realize. So then So she ends up becoming a spy for just a spy against Russia. Then in the 80s, there's another character who her name is Anya, and she was part of this foreign studies initiative that they did. I'm sure this was a real thing where really bright Russian students got to go to college in the US as a way to like foster a goodwill. And like Anya is so pro-Soviet. She is like given the opportunity to stay in the US, like to defect after she graduates, and she doesn't. And she leaves this guy that she's super in love with and she goes back. But when she was given the opportunity to defect in the US, the guy said to her, like, you'll one day you'll realize your line. And something happens in Russia that she realized was her line. And so she then starts spying for the US against the Soviet Union, and it's in the 80s, so it's a very interesting time to be reading about the Soviet Union. And the storylines, just you have both stories separately, but then by the end, the way that they come together was brilliant. I was gasping on the beach. I love this so much. I gave it 4 stars. I am just such a huge fan of this author now. I've been on a journey reading her backlist. So good. Okay, before I accidentally skipped over a book from before. I'm sorry. So we're going back in time. Um, to The Most Famous Girl in the World by Aman Harari Kia. This book comes out next week. Oh, why does Goodreads say it came out in May 7th? That's not true. This is like Inventing Anna, but make it a murder mystery. I feel like I don't even need to say anything else. And it's like kind of a thriller, so I don't want to say anything else. But I can say that Monday's episode of the show will be me and Aman talking about this book. So you'll get to hear everything we talk about celebrity and scammers. And it's scammers. And it's very timely now that Anna Delvey is going to be on Dancing with the Stars. So I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. It has one of the best book endings I have read in a very long time. The conversation on Monday is spoiler free. So I suggest listening to it on Monday and then Tuesday going out to the bookstore and picking this book up, and let me know your thoughts on that ending. So now we're hopping back to the correct order. The next book is Kingdom of the Wicked. So you may remember if you listened to the Erin Sode back in the fall, which was the episode of the show that my sister was on. I feel like we should do an updated one soon. I've said this before, I've said this a million times. She is like the YA fantasy queen of the family. So she was talking about books and she mentioned the series Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco. And she said it's about the 7 princes of hell. And I was like, sign me the fuck up. So a few months ago, I was at Strand and I had store credit and I saw this there and I got it. So the next 3 books that I read are the 3 books in this series. So I really can't say much, but this is a completed 3-book series about the 7 princes of hell. So our main girl, I forgot her name, which like I always forget, Amelia. So our main girl, Amelia, is a witch. She lives in Italy, and it kind of seemed like Victorian times. Like the witches in this town had to like hide, like they're not out and about like, hey, I'm a witch. So her and her twin sister Victoria have always been taught to protect their magic and to fear the 7 princes of hell, each one of those princes representing a different deadly sin. But Victoria is found, Amelia finds her sister murdered. So she goes on this quest for vengeance to find the killer, and she wants to kill him. And to have help doing that, she summons a demon, but she accidentally ends up summoning the Prince of Wrath, the deadly sin of Wrath. So her and Wrath go on this journey together to avenge her sister's death. I really love the first book. The second one is where this series really stood out for me. Like any fantasy series, the first one is kind of introductory, and then the world just blew open in the second one. I completely abandoned my TBR for a week to read these books. I loved it so much. I obviously cannot tell you anything else because I don't want to spoil it, but I thought that the world was so interesting. So I read Kingdom of the Wicked, Kingdom of the Cursed, and Kingdom of the Feared. And then we're going to skip ahead a second. I also read the first spin-off book, Throne of the Fallen, which is about a different one of the Princes of Sin. That one is about envy. And then very excitingly, next month, there is a book coming out about a different Prince of Sin. So I'm very excited that she's really expanding this world because there's so much here that she can explore and that I'm like so interested in. I Oh my God, I love them all. They're spicy. Like the first three are YA. Apparently, Throne of the Fallen is her adult book, but like which Throne of the Fallen is so spicy. But even the Kingdom of the Wicked books, they're spicy in like a very fun way. These books reminded me, I haven't felt this way reading a fantasy series for the first time since I read the From Blood and Ash books, like the first two, maybe three, and then that series kind of fell off the rails and I did stop reading it. But um I think it's such a treat when you read a fantasy book and you just want to drop everything and get sucked into this world. And I spent a week in this world and I loved it so much. And I'm so happy that the next book is coming out so soon. So those are the next four books that I read. And I gave them all 4 stars. And we are going to cap this off with a 5-star read. I actually did 2 audiobooks in August, which is crazy for me. So you guys know that one of the things I do is I have a monthly historic book always running in the background on audio. I finished the one about the Queen so quickly. So I was like, let me start my next. And I picked up JFK Jr., an intimate portrait. It is the latest book on JFK Jr. It is an oral history from it's basically his life told through his closest friends, family. Like his sister Caroline isn't in this, but Carol Radziwill of Roni fame, one of my favorite ever Real Housewives, who was his married to his cousin, who was one of his best friends. She talks about it in this book, but it really is like his closest friends. You hear from people who worked in his dad's administration, Secret Service men. It is basically a biography of JFK Jr.'s life. I knew like a decent amount. I feel like I knew more than the average person on the street just because of how I am, but I feel like I really got to know who he was through this book. I flew through this. So typically I only listen to an audiobook when I'm like doing my makeup or like doing my skincare, which is like a few minutes if I'm doing my hair, but I didn't really do my hair over the summer. But I found myself every time I wasn't like reading or watching TV really, I was listening to this book. I couldn't stop. I feel like it also would be good like reading the physical version. I just decided to do this on audio and it was great on audio because it's an oral history. So think of if you've never read an oral history, it's written in the same format as Daisy Jones and the Six. So you got like this whole cast of characters on audio. Some of them were the real people who were on it. 2 of his closest friends and Rosemary Trenzio, she worked at George's magazine, and then Liz McNeil were 2 of his closest friends who they speak themselves on this book. But it was so good. And I found myself then not wanting to finish it because I didn't want to read about his death. I had the feeling that I felt when I was watching the season of The Crown when Diana dies, when it's like, you know what's about to happen, but you're just like praying that the ending will somehow be different. Reading about his death was so brutal. It was just like, it was really rough. And obviously there's a lot about Carolyn Bessette, his wife in this. And I do have the book Once Upon a Time that came out about her. That's going to be my September nonfiction. But I love this so much. I think if you don't even have to be into politics, just like it is a fascinating American story. And it also made me so sad to think about what he could have been doing today. And yeah, it was just so, so good. I will be thinking about it forever. Highly, highly recommend. That is the August wrap up. That I feel like I went through it very quickly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not getting mad at me that this is out 2 days late. Our September book club pick. Oh, I didn't write it down. So usually a fun fact, I have like a little note in my computer in like the computer Mac Notes app where I like have all the info about the book club and that's what I read off, but I forgot to write it for September, but I know it off the top of my head. The September book club pick is Realm Breaker by Victoria Aveyard. I'm actually saving this because one of the last weekends the last weekend of September, I'll be house sitting. So I'm going to read it then. I've had this on my TBR since it came out. It is a fantasy about pirates. There are 2 other books, so if we all love it, then we can keep reading them. The book club episode will be out on October 3rd. So if you would like to have your thoughts, please get them to me by October 1st. You can DM them to me at KRedWhat or Professional Book Girl, or email them to me at professionalbookgirlpod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following and subscribed as you do on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Leave a rating and review. It's a free way to support me. Follow me on Instagram at Kayla, follow the show at Professional Book Girl, and I will see you guys on Monday with my very fun conversation with Aman Hararikia.